political world is aflame, and we are going to take some time here this evening to look back over the past 20 years since the establishment and election of the First National Assembly, and to look forward too. We, as an Assembly and as a Parliament, have been staging a series of events throughout this year to mark the fact that it's 20 years since the first Assembly elections in 1991. I, as Llywydd of the Assembly, have been eager to look back, yes, but also to look forward to the next 20 years. And that is why we are holding our first ever Festival of Democracy in the Senedd over the next 3 or 4 days. There will be discussion and debate, there will be comedy, there'll be music, and there'll be all sorts of elements that make modern Wales what it is. And there will also be discussion on the challenges facing us and how we together can meet those challenges and deliver our dreams for Wales. That's the objective. It's quite ambitious, an aim to set for 3 or 4 days' work, but today and this evening we will be working with partners, as we will be over the weekend, to promote discussion and events in their own areas. This evening we're working with Itv Wales, who are sponsoring this evening, so thank you very much to them for that. And we, as a panel, will be looking back at the last 20 years and forward to the next 20 years. We are very fond of describing ourselves as the class of 99. We were all elected in 1999. Some of us have left. Some of us have taken something of a commercial break, as Dr. Dye did. But our memories vary as to how well we remember those initial years. But I will transfer now to Jenkins, who will guide us through this evening's event. So thank you very much and enjoy the rest of the evening. Thank you very much, Llywydd, and may I also extend a very warm welcome to you all here to this opening session of Gwlad, the Future Wales Festival.
Welcome to you all here this evening to the opening session of Gwlad, Future Wales Festival, where we'll be looking back at 20 years of Welsh devolution and that big old place next door, and where we'll be addressing where we are now and looking forward to the future and where we're likely to go over the course of the next 20 years. So quite a lot to squeeze in to 1 hour, and I'm sure you're all looking forward to hearing from our panel here this evening. But before we get started, we have a very short VT where we've managed to condense 20 years into around about 2 minutes.
Good morning. And it is a very good morning in Wales.
This office has been under all kinds of political and administrative pressure from other places, and this can't go on.
A huge reduction in the plastic bags, carrier bags, literally they were tons.
Showing telling Rodney Morgan that it wasn't a sympathy for, and he really needs now to start listening to the people of Glen.
I feel very proud to be slipping the captain's armband onto my church lead again today.
I'm not going to give up on this idea of a Labour alliance. I think it is important that there is a viable alternative to a minority Labour administration.
Two parties, Labour and Black Party, have managed to secure a way forward to provide stable and progressive government.
It's absolutely marvellous. We waited so long for this, 46 years. And the most important thing is we actually got a rail service to Cardiff.
They wanted lawmaking powers, and they got them.
Can you change the law in this area? I can say, yes, we can do that, rather than, we might be able to, but we've got to ask Westminster first. It might all take a fair bit of time.
Dwi'n enwebu Lian Wood fel Prif Weinidog Cymru.
Ar wy fydd, Mark Drakeford yn datgan ac yn cadarnhau.
Hope to make an impact and difference to Wales's youth and empower the voices of young people.
Yes, many memories evoked there, I'm sure, and I'm sure we're going to talk about that a little later on, Carwyn Jones. But yes, as we heard, as Elin Jones said, we have here the class of 99. Manchester United have the class of 92, but the Welsh Assembly has the class of 99, and you were, of course, all elected as part of the first cohort of AMs back in the first election in 1999, and you don't really need any introduction, but I will go through everyone here just in case. We have Dr Lloyd, Carwyn Jones, Elin Jones, David Melding and Mike German. So give them all a warm welcome if you will. Thank you. And yeah, there will be an opportunity for you to ask some questions after we've had an initial discussion here. So if you do have anything you'd like to ask, please by all means put your hand up and I'll come to you when I can. Now I must say personally it is a pleasure to be here this evening, but you were supposed to get Mr Adrian Masters, but for some reason Adrian said that he couldn't possibly be here today because he simply had to work, and he couldn't work from Cardiff, he had to work in London for some reason, I don't really know why, but that's where he is. But he does send his apologies, and in his stead you have somebody who doesn't yet need laser eye treatment and who has slightly less impressive facial hair. But I hope I'll do this evening. But my wir am bleser I fod yma hynna.
It truly is a pleasure to be here this evening. I'm very grateful for the invitation.
I should give the caveat that I was only 4 years of age on September the 18th, 1997, when Wales went to the polls for that historic referendum. And so I am very much a child of devolution. I know you won't fool children of devolution, so perhaps it is apt that I am the one here sitting this evening. But I'd like to start, if I may. Carwyn Jones, I'll start with you. Can we go back to 1997, to the campaign? Because the past two referenda that we've either participated in or witnessed, namely the referendum on our membership of the European Union and the Scottish independence referendum, they were very tense. They were very, well, they weren't very nice referenda at times. And perhaps society has been more divided after those referenda than before. But was the 1997, the build-up to the referendum, the campaign, was it as fraught as that? Was it as toxic as that campaign?
No, because politics has become much more toxic over the past 20 years. It was well fought, hard fought, but you didn't see the toxicity that you get now. I mean, I was the secretary of Bridgend and Ogmore, say yes. The MP for Ogmore was anti-devolution, as was his daughter. Janice is not here to see anything. Right, but at the time, she was. So, and Ogmore actually, if it had counted on its own, would have had the highest yes vote in Wales.
Right.
It was Ogmore that won the vote in Bridgend at the time. I have to, unfortunately, got to say that that's true. But no, it was a very different campaign. very much focused on issues rather than individuals, I felt. But very close. I remember the night of the referendum. Now, the scenes you saw there were the Park Hotel. Now, I had worked the following day, so I couldn't be there. And I rang into the Park Hotel to say that we'd won in Bridgette. It was the first time they'd heard that there'd been a win in one of the counties. But of course, as the night went on, it became more and more depressing, and we saw what happened in Cardiff. Anglesey was close, you know, and at the end of it, we had Powys left to declare Gwynedd and Carmarthenshire. Now, we'd heard that Carmarthenshire voted yes, but we didn't know the result. Powys wasn't as bad as people thought. Gwynedd was actually a bit better, given what had happened in Anglesey. But I have to say, at that point, I'd given up. I thought, I'm going to watch this in bed.
You'd given up completely?
I'd given up.
Yeah.
I'm going to confess it now. I was in bed. I thought, I'm going to watch the end of it anyway. And Hugh Edwards appeared on the screen saying, we hear that not only has Carmarthenshire voted yes, but it's voted yes with a large majority. And it's not just a large majority, but it's enough to give the yes campaign victory across the whole of Wales.
Right.
So I jumped out of bed. In a display of athleticism rarely seen since. And it was remarkable. It was very, very close. And people were, at the time, reluctant to make a step that they thought wasn't needed. Because a lot of people said to me, well, we've got a Labour government now, so we don't need devolution.
Right.
And it was a tough message to counter sometimes. But here we are. But toxic, no, it wasn't toxic.
David Melding, I wondered if I could ask you, your party was against Welsh devolution and campaigned so in 1997. Did you feel as though the party was fighting an uphill battle from the off because mainly of the lack of Conservative MPs in Wales at the time?
Well, I mean, the party very sensibly got behind a no campaign.
Why do you say sensibly?
Well, it was in favour, basically, and it would have put off a lot of Labour voters, basically, in the Valleys area. I mean, the story of the second referendum is, you know, Labour got their vote out. I think the county to vote more strongly for devolution was Neath Port Talbot, if I recall. You know, that's astonishing, that shift. Anyway, but my personal part was I campaigned and voted no, but it was a fairly light campaign in terms of my personal involvement, because it was just a few months after the general election, and it was difficult, really, I think, for my employer to really allow me a lot of time off. So, I respected that. And we were quite tired from that, and I mean, clearly, when you get, well, we thought it was essentially sort of only a once in a century result, but as it happened, 2001 and nearly 2005 also fitted that pattern. But we were quite stunned. I mean, I think there was reasonable confidence that it was winnable. I think what really affected me during the campaign is that Scotland voted a week before in an act of utter genius in terms of if Boris Johnson had ever advised Tony Blair and the Yes campaign in Wales about how to stagger things and use a process, he really would have learned something valuable. And so the Scottish result was so emphatic. I felt quite numb by it, because I thought, well, I still went on and voted no, but I realised actually at that point, with my interest in constitutional matters, it really would have been peculiar if Scotland had been on its own, and you're kind of thinking, well, if you're going to have devolution, you want it as a scheme in Wales, and then it came in Northern Ireland soon after as part of the peace process as well. So it was very, very strange. And then after the Scottish result, I was pretty sure there would be a fairly clear win for Yes. And I had the reverse experience then of Carwyn. I was just watching it, just utterly astonished about how the event was going on, and it seemed as if we were going to win. But it was one of those things that when the result came in, I thought, well, that's the result. I think because of what was happening in the country, I didn't really at that point feel real, strong identity with a no vote at that time. Though that's certainly how I voted. I mean, I thought it was, it would have been strange to have suddenly changed my mind late in having campaigned. So I did stick with it. But a remarkable night, yeah.
Yeah, and the point there about the Scottish devolution referendum, I think, is a key one. And Michael, Elin and Di, if I could ask you, how did that sort of mobilise the yes movement? You know, what sort of effect did it have on that?
Well, I think it was very important. It was quite deliberate at the time to have the one before the other in order to give that impression. Because I think, you know, like Carwyn, and I led the campaign for our party and the links with the other parties, and we were all very, very nervous about the way that this was going. In fact, I have to admit to being in the ITV Wales studio, and just when the last but 3 result came out, I said, well, that's it. I said, we've lost. I actually said it on air. I was very disappointed. And then suddenly we had this information about Carmarthenshire, and I sort of woke up and smiled and said, oh, I'm pleased to be able to change my mind, and then rushed off afterwards over to the Park Hotel, and it was pouring with rain. I can remember that bit. But I think the main thing is that Scottish lead helped people to realise that it was achievable. You know, it wasn't about, as always in referenda, you've got to be careful that people answer a different question to the one that's put before them. But in the end, it's about emotion, it's about the way you feel about things. And it gave people a sense that this was something that could work. And I think that helped it over the line, there's no doubt about that. And I also found that the No campaign didn't have quite the bite that I thought they would have in order to be able to hit those emotional buttons in quite the same way. And I think the Scottish result was therefore was a lever, and without it I don't think we would have got over the line.
I think the Scottish result was obviously a boost for the Yes campaign. What was a setback, or certainly for those of us who were supportive of the Yes campaign, was another event in that September, which was the death of Diana. That happened a few weeks, August the 31st, and I was in Barcelona, by the way, on the Ramblas. You were in Aberystwyth. And the waiter on the Ramblas realised that crowd I was with had no idea what had just happened, and decided that we were German, not Welsh, and so told me, Diana ist kaputt. That's how I heard about Diana's death. And of course, as a campaigner for Yes in that referendum, it was obvious that there would be a great mood swing throughout the UK and Union Jacks everywhere as a result of that morning, which became much more than we'd even anticipated at that early stage. So that made a lot of us quite nervous, I think, in the Yes campaign. I learned a lot of lessons about Ceredigion in that Yes campaign. I was a newcomer to politics generally, not a newcomer to Ceredigion, but politics in Ceredigion. And I spent quite a bit of the campaign canvassing on the phone. I learned how negative the Cardi farmer was to the whole idea of spending money on another tier of government. That was a bit of a shock to me, that, you know, Welsh-speaking culturally very Welsh farmers would find it quite a negative thing to consider voting for Welsh Parliament. And people who'd just moved into Wales from England would think, well, of course Wales should have its own voice. And I got very confused at that, because all my stereotypes were being broken, and I learned really valuable lessons about the nature of politics and how people think in political life. I was in the coops in Aberystwyth on the night of the result, and my reaction to thinking that the vote had been lost was to drink more in order to forget the result, and then I had to suddenly sober myself up a little bit.
So you remember the result?
I do remember the result, yeah. Or somebody told me the day after.
And if we could move forward then, 2 years later, to the first elections, Lloyd. First elections took place, first cohort of AMs were elected in that pokey old room. It was an historic day, undoubtedly, but this may be a bit cliche to ask this, but was it a palpably historic day? Was there a sense that this is something that is happening today? This will go down in the history books.
Yeah, it is, and it was palpably historic. I mean, back to the night of the referendum result, I was in Swansea Brangwyn Hall for the count. Swansea actually voted yes. I was one of the ones behind the Swansea Yes Says Yes campaign, and Swansea, the only major city, I suppose if you don't count St David's or St Asaph, voted yes in Wales for having an assembly, which subsequently some of us led a campaign to have the actual assembly in Swansea as a result of that. But no, it was palpably historic, because I remember leaving the Brangwyn Hall about 3 a.m. Thinking that Swansea had voted yes, but Wales had voted no, so we all trooped off in disappointed fashion. And but we'd heard the same rumours as you've heard about Carmarthenshire. And in the rain, when the Carmarthenshire results came out, quite happy to admit, shed a tear, really. So yes, it was historic. Otherwise, if we'd lost that, Wales arguably could have been wiped off the map. You know. So in terms of 99, yeah, that was historic. Certainly was historic personally, because I wasn't expected to be elected. I was a full-time GP, and it was a bit of a shock to the practice, really, that I found myself being an assembly member, because for the first 2 months, from the May to the July, I carried on working out my notice as a full-time GP and a full-time AM here. So it was a bit of a shock, but it was a sign. I was quite happy, in fact, deliriously happy, to be involved in such a seismic happening for Wales and its people, redressing what we'd lost 6 centuries earlier.
Actually, that's quite a good question. Did you all feel sort of rather surprised at the fact that you were elected, or how did you react to the election?
I only got in. I was actually surprised I hadn't resigned my job, and I told my employer that it was a very distant prospect of me getting elected. And then Geraint, the chemist, won Rhondda, and this basically opened up an extra Conservative seat on the list, because Geraint, it was one of the sweeping gains the Plaid made in the valleys. And during the whole first Assembly term, I used to inquire of Geraint, what's the health of the Rhondda Plaid Cymru, Raj? And were they in need of any donations? He always took it in good spirit. But, I was astonished to get elected, actually.
And Carwyn Jones, it was a Labour minority government at the very beginning, but it was by no means clear-cut, was it? It was by no means a sort of game, set and match for the party for that first period.
No, it had been a difficult campaign. The leadership contest had just not gone well in terms of public perception. A lot of Labour voters decided they weren't going to vote Labour this time around. Yeah, I mean, we picked up a swing to Plaid, not as much as it turned out to be, if I'm honest, but people saying, well, no, this time I'm a protest vote, and lots of people saying, well, it's a Welsh election now, it's just different. Bridgend had a Labour MP for, at that point, 14 years. 10 years. There was 87 election, Wynne got elected. So I suppose I expected to win. I didn't resign my job because I thought, don't be presumptuous about this. So like Di, I combined the two for a few months. What was odd about it was the votes were verified the night before and counted the day after. So I had a good idea I'd won the night before. Right. So you just look at the votes, you've got a good idea what's what. So I slept reasonably well that night.
You slept soundly that night then, yeah.
Right. But some of the other results, I remember Wynne was there, Wynne Griffiths, who was the MP, and I said to Wynne, I've just heard that we've lost Islwyn. And he said, oh, I thought that's a very laid-back reaction. And then 2 minutes later he said, when he said lost Islwyn, we lost control of the council. I said, no, we've lost the seat in the Assembly. And his jaw dropped. It was that sort of night. It was an incredible night for, it didn't help my party, but it was an incredible night in Welsh politics in terms of the way the votes turned out.
Yeah, it was one of Plaid Cymru's was successful.
Yes, and I remember the offices, laying out of the offices in T. Howell, and the civil servants who had been responsible for planning some of that beforehand had got a bit carried away with guessing who would win which seat, and therefore the Rhondda office had already got the Wayne David name on the office door when Geraint Davies, who had just been elected for Plaid Cymru, turned up to the office, and it was a very fine office that Geraint Davies got as a result of taking Wayne David's office. So a lesson learnt, I think, for civil servants, and people have to never assume what the election result will be, and never put the name on the door before the people have cast their vote. But I think one of the things perhaps we forget as well in terms of 99 is the significance of the number of women who were elected in 1999. So we've celebrated last year 100 years of women getting the vote and also being allowed to stand for election from 1918. From 1918 until 1999, only, I think it was 7 women had been elected in Wales at all to the House of Commons. Just 7. Overnight in 1999, 24 women were elected into mainstream Welsh politics and into the National Assembly. And those women then became spokespeople and government ministers. Alan Michael's first cabinet had 4 or 5 women in very big portfolio areas, key portfolio areas. So there was huge transformation, really, in terms of how politics in Wales sounded and looked with that election. And I think we forget that sometimes, how significant that election was in changing the game in Wales in terms of numbers of women involved in active politics. Caveat, we've still got a long way to go, though there still aren't enough women in politics to get close to the gender equality we need. The Assembly on the whole has kept up on that, but Westminster and in particular local councils have a far too low a percentage of women councillors, only around 27% still.
And there certainly were teething problems during that first year. Objective 1 funding, of course, European issues causing problems way back then, 20 years ago. The vote was, of course, it was a very slim vote for yes in 97, but how much did those teething problems affect the lack of trust that the Welsh people had in the institution?
I think it was very important in that very first year, as we hit crises, and there were several that we hit, but political and external. As we hit the crisis, I think there was a feeling everyone felt that we needed to support this nascent body that was emerging from as a little beginning. It was like a foundling child, really. We had to manage that. So I think there was an understanding, though there were still quite brutal conversations and dialogue. There was an understanding that we needed to make this work. And if it foundered because we couldn't make it work, if we founded on controversy, if we founded on not making progress, then there was a danger that people would turn away from it and we would not have that support. So it was balancing those two things together that I think was part of that first period. You earlier asked about the building itself, whether that had an impression. We went in knowing that we were going to have something better. So it was temporary. I think that what gave us the confidence, much more confidence, was that civil society engaged a lot with us. You could come out of the chamber and there were always people there from organisations to lobby you. It was, in fact, it became a hub of activity as a place, even though it wasn't perfect. So I think that actually gave us a lot of lift. Though the actual formal opening, which was by the Queen, and then I can remember outside my window Michael Hall singing and rehearsing all afternoon and making it very difficult to be able to do anything else at all. But that event, with the lights and the glitz that went with it, actually I think that was the big starring moment when, we're here and we're staying.
And David Melding, how excuse me, this may well be because I was so young I don't remember it, but how were the Conservatives, how did they react to that particular time, the crisis, this new institution, the Conservatives had backed no? Was it a case of, well, you voted for it, so this is what you get?
Well, the official history now is that we were principled and democratic, immediately accepted the referendum result. But actually, it was a pretty fierce work in progress. So the party was fundamentally divided between those that wanted to push very quickly for a second referendum. Unfortunately for them, the party was still toxic, so it had no real, from us, sort of recommendation in it for the public. But the public themselves did not want a second referendum. It was so unlike the Brexit result, because people had voted, very, very narrowly, obviously. But I mean, there was, what are they voting for? An assembly. It was not difficult to interpret that. And then, the other half really of the party, wanted to use the assembly to, be a real force in Wales and to rebuild and to detoxify the party brand, essentially. Then the members voted for Rod Richards as leader. The late Rod Richards, I can refer to his leadership a bit. He died recently, so I don't want to be too bitter in my recollection of his leadership. But I mean, Rod had a very firm view, which was that we should be quite strong opponents of the political elite and the whole concept really of devolution. And the members went for him over Nick Bourne, but most of the candidates who got elected were, had supported Nick and were from the side of the party. I suppose, fortunately, the people that really wanted to get elected, and came forward, were committed to the institution. And that worked its way out. I mean, Rod's leadership lasted about 9 months. We fought on an execrable manifesto called Fair Play for All, which included the ferret phrase, or I'm not sure if it made the final draft, I think it did, linguistic apartheid. And so about half of the candidates in winnable seats had written a collective letter to him saying that we disassociate us from this wording. So we were horribly divided. And the group meetings, were very, very tense, to put it mildly. But things moved on quite quickly. Actually, it wasn't 9 months, was it? It was even less his leadership. And then the party did then, formally accept the referendum, and we made those statements. So that was the year 2000, and it really wasn't until about 2005 that we were in the territory of, well, how do we make devolution flourish and look at lawmaking powers and having proper balance between executive and legislative powers, because Wales had the most incredible devolution design. You had a really quite powerful government. The Welsh government's always, its executive powers were always fairly extensive. You were talking about the whole Objective One stuff. And then this incredibly weak legislature. And it was so unlike any Westminster model anywhere. And that's what I used to talk about, saying, well, if you've got it, you may as well have a proper balanced version of it. But, it was a good 6 years, I think, before we really settled in.
I was going to say it took until perhaps 2006, then, is it fair to say, for the Wales Governance of Wales Act, until devolution perhaps was even anywhere where it could start to live its potential, to deliver?
Well, yeah, I mean, it was set up as like a county council, really, wasn't it, effectively, at the start, basically, until the Government of Wales Act in 2006. And then in 2006 as well, we moved into the new Senate building. So there was a bit of a radical transformation in that year. And but obviously, it was the later referendum in 2011 when we gained primary legislative powers.
The first vote I ever made, actually. Was
I mean, I know the adjective overwhelming is overused these days, but, that result in terms of the Senate having lawmaking powers of its own for the first time since 1405 or thereabouts, was actually overwhelming. 64% said yes and 36%. Now that is what I would say is an overwhelming endorsement, and that's where we are. Really.
And then the Plaid Cymru in 2007, Gwlad, the coalition, finally got itself into a position where it was able to make some big decisions in Wales.
Yeah, and it was a steep learning curve for Plaid Cymru. Plaid Cymru had been quite comfortable, possibly, in being a party of opposition as politicians. It's quite straightforward to be complaining about various issues to government ministers and calling for this and having a go about something else. And then all of a sudden, we were not just a party of government, and somebody like me was a minister in that government, but it was a different discipline that a party such as us that had not been in government, obviously in Westminster, and not been in government in Wales had to adopt straight away. But it was, I think, a hugely rewarding experience for Plaid Cymru in how we adapted to that. I think the One Wales coalition between Plaid Cymru and Labour was a particularly productive government in that period. It allowed you to have free rein as an official opposition, and I think that it created a kind of model. Well, the most important thing, of course, of that legacy is that it did deliver the 2011 referendum, because that was the primary key. Then that was the key to creating that coalition, rather than the Rainbow Coalition, although there were lots of issues that happened at that point of coalition discussions. But what made both, certainly Plaid Cymru stick with the whole idea of working with Labour on that was that Labour, in power in Westminster at the time, could provide the assurance that a referendum would deliver the primary legislative powers. And that was a very positive period of government, but also a constitutionally significant time as well in delivering primary legislative powers, because it transforms what you were able to do when you were able to actually create legislation without reference to another legislature. Previously, of course, we'd have to create legislation in tandem with the Westminster Parliament. I led what was called at the time legislative ELCOs. I can only remember the acronym, ELCOs. I read the red meat ELCO through the Assembly as the Minister for Agriculture. It was the most duplicative, most annoying system, and so time-consuming and wasteful of resources, both MPs and AMs scrutinising the same piece of legislation on a very small area. So it's been quite excruciating, actually getting to a point where 20 years later we have full primary legislation powers and we now have tax-varying powers. It's been a good old slog to get the political consensus to get us there, but we don't give up.
A political slog, Carwyn Jones. You were the First Minister in 2011. A hard-fought battle, was it? Or?
Well, in my party, things had changed in 2007, the coalition. There'd been quite a bitter battle within the party about going to coalition with Plaid. There'd been a conference in the CIA, as it was then, where there was a fair bit of rancour in that conference. In the end, it decided to support the coalition. And that's when, in some ways, there was more of a shift of power back to Cardiff, and less so in Westminster. If you want my honest opinion, I think we would have struggled to have that referendum if the Labour Party had won in 2010.
Really?
Yeah. There was still a very strong opposition to further devolution amongst the MPs, not amongst the membership, because the Labour Party changed completely. I mean, we were very uncomfortable with devolution at the start of the process. By the end of it, they'd elected a crypto-nationalist as their leader. So it was, the party, I'd never have been elected as a leader of Welsh Labour at the end of the 90s. My views would have been seen as too extreme. But amongst the MPs, there was opposition, and I don't know whether we would have had the referendum. David Cameron was supportive. Cheryl Gillan wasn't. She was the Secretary. No, she wasn't.
Did it surprise you that he was supportive?
He was neutral. He said, well, it seems pretty sensible to me, and so it was because of that we had the referendum. Right. I have to say, I was nervous about the timing, because I thought, March, I don't know, just before an election, it'll be dark, and it was difficult to get people out to vote. 7 o'clock, I was knocking doors in Bridgend, and people were saying, we're going to win anyway. Because it was, people assumed that because it was such a big lead in the opinion polls, you couldn't get people out to vote. I don't maybe now it's dark, look how Coronation Street's on in a minute. And that did have an effect, and I thought, July for me would have been, I think, a better time. But, we did it. All 4 major parties were behind it. That was important. It was us against an inflatable pig, if I remember. And I just remember, vividly, we had an event, there was a TV question time in Blackwood, where Roger Lewis, who was then the chief executive of the WU, and myself were on one side, and I forget who was on the other. It was Nathan Gill was one, that's right, and there was somebody else. And in the audience was a group of UKIP supporters who were dead against devolution. And this man asked me a question, and he was dressed in a yellow fishing coat, I remember, like an old-style trawlerman with a hood. And he said, I want to know from Carwyn Jones, if we vote for this, will our taxes go up? I said, no. And he went, that's all we get from politicians, waffle, waffle, waffle. And he said that. That's what he said. He was so taken aback that he said, no. I've always said this style in politics. If I can answer a question directly, I'll just say it. Because I spent 10 years in court, you have to do it that way. And I remember that vividly, but there was no doubt we were going to win. We were surprised to do so well in something. Flintshire flipped completely the other way. Wrexham the same, Monmouthshire almost, but to be honest, if you'd looked at the map of Wales in 1999 after the referendum, it looked very much like the map of Wales in the 13th century. Norman Wales, Welsh Wales. That's what it looked like. That disappeared. And I think in many ways the geographical divisions of 7 centuries disappeared that way.
I know I'm conscious of time, we have 15 minutes left, I think. So if anyone in the audience does have a question, please do raise your hand. Yes, I'll come down here. Yes, fire away.
Yeah, you had a touch on it earlier, about the gender.
Oh, we have a microphone. Oh. Sorry. There we go.
Yeah, Ellen touched on it quickly earlier about the increase in the number of women in politics with the advert of the Assembly, and I'd just be interested to hear about what tangible difference that made, whether that be to the tone of debate and style of debate, but also policy making and the types of policy that came out of the Assembly.
Well, I'd only say that I'm not sure whether any of us are able to answer that, because we've known no different. We were elected into a place where women and men were almost equal numbers from the start. Many people have commented about the tone of debate and about the ability of women to work possibly across political parties. I remember the first assembly, there were men there who would come from Westminster or the House of Commons whose tone was particularly aggressive. Rod Richards was one, David Wigley, Alan Michael. I was surprised, he's so gentle looking these days. I remember him shouting like anything in that chamber. I've heard women shout as well, of course. We had a bit of that this afternoon, actually. But on the whole, I think that it was important for me from the start, and I come from an economic development background, it was important for me as a woman politician not to identify myself solely with issues that were traditionally identified with women, and I think that the Assembly on the whole has seen that women have taken part in all aspects. They've been chairs of finance, they've been finance ministers, they've been Llywyds, and the one job left really is the First Minister role. But for me, actually, it's more important to have women doing everything and all things rather than just the token top job, as we've seen with Theresa May and Margaret Thatcher. Maybe, that just isn't enough to do it that way. You have to, the influence has to be right throughout.
Any other questions?
Don't only ask the women questions.
No, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Yes. I'm conscious of time. Catherine,
I'm just wondering, so I know updates from Westminster here, and things are kicking off, the big Stella and Boris. And then I'm just wondering, how can the Assembly capitalise on what's happening in Westminster, chaos? Like, how can the Assembly cut through when all our attention is drawn there, yet can the Assembly, I suppose, offer something different from that, and how will we get that message across?
I'm going to ask Michael if he has any ideas, seeing as you
I think what's happening at the moment, and if I were to stand apart from the political melee and look down at what's happening around me in Parliament, I'd say that the tree is being shaken well and truly of not just the way in which our democracy is run, but also, more importantly, the way in which our people are represented, and the representation that they have doesn't seem to fit the structure of the society that we are. That's something that I've always been passionate about, that that we've got a rigid structure in politics which hasn't fitted where people have been going. And that journey that people are on now, certainly the politics doesn't fit. So one of the things that I think that the National Assembly offered, quite interestingly, because it's not a full proportional representation system, but it certainly is a more proportional system, is that it actually made people, forced people to work more closely together when people had to in order to take forward the agenda. And I wonder whether two things that the Assembly experience might influence what's happening. And one of them might be that we might see a restructuring of our political base, the way in which political parties are represented. I mean, I won't tell you which party it is, but it's both of them actually. I walk into the door and I see colleagues and I say good morning and they say what's good about it. And it's been that case internally in people's own parties as well, both in the Labour Party and in the Conservative Party. So I wonder whether the message of working together, the message of having to deliver something which requires a bit of commitment and a bit of bending yourself to make things work is a real lesson that we can take from the National Assembly. And I hope, by the way, that it will lead to a different structure of our political system and hopefully proportional representation in London.
Well, I think one of the consequences of what's happening in Westminster now is people in the street, because when we speak to our constituents, they say, is a mess in Westminster. And, well, the feeling is, well, actually, you couldn't make more of a mess of it in Cardiff then, because people have traditionally, if you're not particularly politically aligned, have thought, well, it's okay, you've got something little there in Cardiff, there, keep the boys and girls happy, But now it's been seen in a sort of different frame, really, saying, well, actually, the boys and girls in Cardiff Bay can hardly make a worse job than what's happening up there now. So that's part of the reason why there's a resurgence in this idea that actually Wales actually could do things, because we've always been browbeaten with the way that the media runs in this country, that the mother of Parliament, supremely has got power and wisdom extending back over 8 centuries and stuff, whereas everything else is a little bit, late in the day and a bit sort of, amateurish. Well, actually, lots of people are refocusing now, thinking, well, actually, there's a right humdinger of a mess. What are we going to do about this? Well, actually, focus on Wales. Focus on the Senate.
Yeah, I think what's changed is that 20 years ago, you'd knock a door and people would say, oh, God, the Assembly's what's the council, isn't it? And we're on stilts. Now, of course, the first year was not brilliant. Now, it's the other way around. I get people saying to me, well, these things are stable in Cardiff. Look at Westminster, what a mess that is. I take no pleasure in that, incidentally. I look at Commons and the Lords and think, oh, it's the last place I want to be in is either of those places at the moment. And it's a serious... No, thank you. No, thank you. I think the problem we have now is that there are two things, he said humbly, that I said in 2016 that unfortunately have come true. First one I said is Ireland. And people couldn't understand why I kept on going on about Ireland and its border. The reason is my wife's a Belfast Catholic. And sure enough, here we are, the Irish border is the sticking point that can't be resolved with any current proposals. And secondly, I said then, and I'll say it again here, a bad Brexit carries with it the breakup of the UK, the seal of the breakup of the UK, which I would not want to see. I think Di is right. I think what's happening in Westminster is driving what's called indie curiosity. I do come across people who say to me, well, maybe it's worth looking at. They're not in favour, but they're not dead against as they used to be. And I don't think the chaos in Westminster is a good basis in which to build an independence movement, but nevertheless that's what's driving people. And it is not good for anybody in any party or any part of the UK to see Westminster as such a mess. That's not good for anybody. So for me, unfortunately, what I'm seeing at the moment is what I've said before actually happening. If you look at the opinion polls in Northern Ireland, if there was a hard border, the majority of people would vote to join the South. And the reason for that is that now compared to 25 years ago, when people, even Catholics in the north, saw the Republic as this sort of conservative, backward, poor, priest-dominated country, and they did. It's now the exact opposite. The south is a prosperous, liberal, open country. Why not join the Republic? And that's driving a generation of Protestants, particularly, who have no memory of the Troubles. Scotland, well, I mean, Scotland knows what's left doesn't work. You can't have England and Wales. It doesn't make any sense. And I've said it before publicly, the great issue that we may have to face, I hope not, but we may have to face, is that we become independent whether we like it or not, chaotically, because England says, we're off to be independent now, you lot over there, you subsidy junkies in Wales, as it'll be portrayed in the media, you go off on your own. This is territory that if you'd said this to me 20 years ago when we started, I would have thought ridiculous. It's fantastic we have a tax-paying lawmaking parliament. I remember writing a pamphlet in 2003 calling for it. Martin actually had to edit it. And it was a dangerous nationalist pamphlet on some of my party. Most of it's come true, actually, but there we are. To get to that point, both in terms of the people of Wales and my party to where we are now, has been, it's been a long and sometimes difficult journey. But I do now worry, those of us, David and myself, for example, who've made the case for constitutional change, because it's broken completely, for a more equal partnership with countries within the UK, for a more federal structure. England's the problem because it's so big. We've been saying this for a long time, and now it is now the only option, unless you want to see the UK break up. And, the best time, I think, for us, both in Wales and the UK, was late 90s, early 2000s, when things were fairly stable, and now we are in a very, very bad situation. It's a critical mess. Cause in Westminster, I take no pleasure in that, because I don't think it helps any of us to see that happening. But I'm sure they've sorted it all out by now.
One final question. Yes, Martin, you wrote a book about the first 10 years of the Welsh Assembly, famously, yes.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I'd just like to inject not a negative, but a cautionary note. Everyone's talking about the Assembly as if it is a settled institution and that it's the will of the Welsh people that it should last forever and dance off into the sunset, etc. What we have to remember is that in no election since the Assembly was founded have more than 50% of the people voted in such an election. We're also in a very difficult time where all sorts of political possibilities become more manifest than they've ever been before, and Brexit has brought in this totally toxic approach towards politics. It's just so much nastier now than it ever was. And we're not quite sure where that negative energy is going to go, and I wouldn't rule out that it goes in the direction of people saying, let's abolish the Assembly. And one further point that I make here is, from a historical point of view really, going back to 1997, at the time of the referendum campaign, it was obviously important to win that campaign, and I think everybody who was campaigning for it, who was in favour of it, knew that it was going to be tight and it wasn't going to be easy. Therefore, promises were made about what the Assembly was going to be able to deliver in terms of the economy, in terms of public services. And in a sense, I think that people overreached themselves because things are not easily deliverable. We know from our experience now for 20 years that actually dealing with some of these long-term intractable problems in terms of poor health, in terms of getting decent jobs, in terms of skilling people, take far longer than just an Assembly term. You're talking about decades to put things right. And therefore I think that because those promises were made at that referendum, people were thinking, immediately the Assembly got underway, oh, we're going to see action now, we're going to see things change for the better very quickly. And of course, what happened, and I was around at the time, was that in those early years, people were thinking, and journalists, and I'm as guilty of this as anyone else, being impatient and saying, what is happening here? And I remember writing stories about David Ellis Thomas, who was the presiding officer, coming out with statements like, I get up in the morning, I shave my face, I wash my face, and I think, what the hell am I doing going down to that place? Because very little was actually happening, certainly in the first year. And I think that legacy from those overreaching promises in the very early days have lingered all the way down through the history of the Assembly to this day. And so the important thing is that with the new powers that the Assembly's got, that everyone is there operating on top form in order to deliver a better Wales.
I've actually sort of stolen my last question. I was going to ask, is the Assembly safe? You know, is it safe for the next 20 years, for the next 50, 100 years? Because we do see the rise in, I think, the opinion polls for the Abolish the Assembly party have been creeping up over the past year. Yeah, very small, but they are nonetheless creeping up. So is the Assembly as we know it safe, or does it need change, perhaps radical change in some aspects? Llywydd, I ddod at chi.
Llywydd, I'll turn to you.
The possibility that a negative energy could take hold of and abolish the Assembly movement. There's also a very positive energy that could take hold of getting rid of Westminster rule in Wales as well. So there are competing forces at play here, and they are uncertain times. And just as Di, I think, referred earlier to the fact that Westminster chaos is fueling the indie-curious and indie-certain element of political debate, there is always the need to make sure that we're taking all people with us, not just some people. And yes, it was a time of hope and cool Cymru. It wasn't just around the Assembly. The World Cup, the Rugby World Cup, the Millennium Stadium, the Millennium. It was, it was a very positive time. And then, of course, I'd have to say that the fact that, I was elected in '99 to an institution that had less fiscal powers than the Aberystwyth Town Council that I just left. So the reality of the ability of the place, it was over-talked up by some as we were selling it during a 1997 referendum. There's no doubt about that. But I think, the Assembly as an institution cannot be popular in everything it does or government within it does. I always thought that it would never properly prove itself to the people of Wales or be there for the people of Wales until it had its first farmers' protest, and we had one of those quite early on with the export of live calves, and its first, Fred Francis from Cymdeithas yr Iaith holding a hunger strike outside the Senate building, so we became the place of protest and debate, and yes, we achieved much, but we didn't achieve everything, and that's part of the political and party political dynamic, and we shouldn't be afraid of recognising that democracy is not perfect, and democracy in Wales isn't perfect, and policy application is not perfect in Wales, and we haven't touched on it, and there's no time, but on the whole, there hasn't been a change of government or leadership of that government from the one party as well, and a lot of creativity comes from the challenge in manifestos and the competitive ideas in manifestos from different political parties as well, and that's something else that is a feature of the last 20 years.
The Llywydd should always have the last word, I guess. So, I think we'll tie things up there a little over time. But first, can I thank you, the panel, the five of you, for being here this evening. Really do appreciate it. Diolch yn fawr iawn i chi.
Thank you very much, and thank you all as well. Yes, please give them a warm round of applause.
Diolch i chi hefyd.
And could I also thank you all.
Your kind attendance here this evening. And hope to see you all. Well, the events are going on over the next 3 days, I believe, for Gwlad, this Democracy Festival. So, yes, if you want any more information, please do ask Manon, who's here at the back there, and others. Yes, so please enjoy the rest of the festival. And diolch yn fawr iawn i chi gyd.
Thank you very much. Good night.
And just to say, many of you, if not all of you, are invited now to Fresh for the official launch of Gwlad. I was reminded of the fact that drink and alcohol was part of the 1997 referendum campaign evening. It wasn't for you, Karen, you were working the next day, but it wasn't for me. So if you want to join us for a more informal discussion on 1999 to 2099, then join us in fresh. Diolch yn fawr iawn.
Gwych, diolch yn fawr iawn.
Diolch yn Sion hefyd.
Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you very much, and thank you to Sean too.
Diolch yn fawr.
Croeso.
Diolch yn fawr.
Ti'n ei 2099.
Dyna fe wedes i, 2099.